Hi everybody, Coates here. Welcome to the lecture on thinking and language. This is the second part of Unit 7, so 7b, and this will primarily cover today language development, and the components that go into our language. So it's a relatively shorter part of the unit. So to start out, let's talk about language in general. We'll give a good definition. This picture here is of a class of boys who are studying Hebrew, which is most likely their second language, depending on where they live, but could be their primary language. But either way, all languages are made up of certain components, and we're going to look at that today. So a really good definition of language is our spoken, written, or signed words and the way that we combine them to communicate meaning. So language is used, obviously, to communicate meaning. And we speak it, we write it, we sign it with our hands, American Sign Language, for example. And we use language all the time, verbal and nonverbal. Today we're talking about verbal. So the structure of language is made up of two different ideas. The first one is called a phoneme, which a good definition of the phoneme is the smallest distinctive sound unit, like for the letter A, ah. That's the smallest distinctive sound unit. In English, there are about 40 phonemes. And what becomes challenging is when you go to learn another language's phoneme. Certain Native American languages, for example, have phonemes that we don't have. And so past a certain age, it becomes virtually impossible to pick up on those language phonemes. Now, morpheme is the second piece that goes into language structure. And a morpheme is the smallest unit that carries meaning. So it may be a word or a part of a word, such as a prefix. So, for example, un, as in un, un. So we also know that grammar plays a big piece of language structure. So grammar, I'm not going to get into a huge, big, long discussion of grammar. You've been studying grammar your whole life, but you know that grammar is made up of sort of rules of speaking and writing, rules of where to put your adjective, where to put your noun, things like that. And that grammar is made up of parts of speech which allow us to form those sentences. Now, language development is really what we're looking at here in this lecture. It's a big part of language, studying language, is the development of language. So we have two different types of languages when we first begin to speak. We have receptive language and we have productive language. Receptive language is our understanding of language when it's spoken to us, and productive language is us actually speaking the language. We have the ability to engage in receptive language a lot sooner than we have productive language. For example, an 18-month-old child can understand language a lot better than he can actually say it. So if I said to that 18-year-old child, okay, let's go upstairs to get ready for your tubby, he could understand that, but he could not say those same words. So we learn language in stages, and they're listed here: babbling stage, one-word stage, two-word stage, and telegraphic speech. This is all covered in your reading in a really in-depth way, but I will give you sort of overarching descriptions of those. So the babbling stage is about 4 months old, and this basically is just the beginning of the language development. It's things like agu, for example, here in this stage. The next stage is the stage in which we start to use one word. So your one word stage can be, things like mama, dada, tabi. Now, between your 4 months and your 10 months, you start to make sounds that resemble the sound of the household language. So whatever that language is, if it's English, you're going to start to have sounds that sound like English. If you're a Native American language, you're going to have sounds that sound like that language. French, Spanish, whatever type of language it is. Now, once we hit 12 months, we begin to enter the one-word stage. And we can say one word to, like, for example, look at the kitty. We can say the word kitty, and we can start to communicate. Now, what happens to children at this point in their development is they can start to get very frustrated when they can't communicate what they want to communicate. So teaching children sign language during this time period in the first year of life, in the first year of language development, is really a really helpful tool for them. And contrary to what you might think, it actually helps them learn to talk. The sign language actually helps them learn to talk. So we enter the one word and now the two word stage, in which you can say things like get ball. Instead of get the ball, please, you simply say get ball. And so you really start to emerge this beginning of sentences. And once you hit 24 months or 2 years and above, our language begins to develop quite rapidly into complete sentences. So it's really a fascinating thing to watch. And I remember clearly my children beginning to talk, and you can see really, like, one day they're using one words to talk about the car outside the window, and then pretty much the next day you're having full-blown conversations with them while they're sitting in the back seat of the car. It's amazing to watch language development. So how do we develop language? It's a great question you might ask yourself. So there's a couple of different theories. So one of those theories is what's called the Inborn universal grammar theory. And this was by Noam Chomsky. And he believed that we had this language acquisition device in which was turned on as we reach certain ages. And that allowed everybody worldwide to go through the same developmental piece where they use incorrect grammar, where they go through the stages, the one-word stage, the two-word stage, things like that. So that showed us that there was this universal understanding of grammar. Now, the other piece, the other language development idea has to do with conditioning and sort of responding to your environment, just as we learned in Unit 6, that we would respond to somebody saying, the word please, and then the child would repeat it, and then they would get sort of encouraged to continue to say that word in that situation. So there's the universal grammar piece that Chomsky talked about, and then there was the learning style with conditioning that, say, John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, they looked at when we studied language acquisition. In our next lecture, or maybe even in class, I might touch on this in class tomorrow if we have time, is the areas of the brain in which language takes place, and then what happens when those areas of the brain are damaged. Just like we talked about memory in damaged areas of the brain, language can be impacted as well. So I will see you in class. Take care.